Well, 9/11 is a day everyone remembers, especially retired FBI Agent Jon Moeller. He was in Quantico when he got the call that a plane had just struck the Pentagon mere miles away. He personally led a team of agents into the fray, and then what started as a rescue op quickly turned into an encounter with the love of God. He's here now in studio live with us to share more. John, thanks for being here.
Okay. You're welcome.
Really
Thanks
appreciate it. We're going to hit 9/11. This is a special day. However, your career is fascinating, the breadth and width of what you've done in law enforcement. But you started as a young guy, early 20s, right? Undercover cop in a major city? Is that how you began?
I started out on the streets of Kansas City, Missouri, as a district police officer in the inner city, and then worked my way to narcotics as an undercover detective. And I was down there for about 3 years.
So you're undercover on the streets. Are you living on the streets?
Well,
so to speak?
So to speak. We are amongst the public. We're amongst any place where there was drug problems, reports of drug activity. That's where we headed to, and we just moved about amongst them to determine where drugs were coming from and take drugs off the street.
Some rough work. I mean, at any point did you feel like, you know, this isn't the calling for my life? Did you think of getting out of it?
Well, the biggest part of that is I wasn't saved. And now looking back, you know, you look back 30 years and look at where you're called, God had this planned out, yet you look at law enforcement, the majority are not saved, yet they choose to go into help people, come alongside people when they're at their worst, and yet that's where they've been called to be. What's interesting about that is everything along the way was a calling. So I knew that the homicides, the drugs, all of those things were there for a reason, not just to do right and wrong or lock people up or not. This was all about really softening my heart to get me in a place where I was willing to hear the gospel. So I grew up in the church, and by the time I was in undercover, I started going back to church. I felt like there was something missing there. I make no secret of it. I was an adrenaline junkie. That was part of why I was doing, besides helping people, that was part of it as well. And I was in a drug deal that went bad, and the very next day, I was in a 15-passenger van singing VeggieTales on the way down to Oklahoma City on a mission trip. And so there was this tension between what my life was during the day, and these people didn't know what I did for a living, and from what I was supposed to be. And it was a reflection of my spiritual life. And over the course of the next 3 years, I had a decision that I had to make. I either believed Christ was who he said he was, I either believed Scripture or I didn't. And that was about 18 months before 9/11.
So by the time 9/11 hits, you have a relationship with the Lord, and you would need it, right? You would need that spiritual equipment and battle armor. Talk about 9/11, your reflections.
Well, what's interesting is in this country, it was very much there was a sense of how could this have happened? There was a mindset of what can I do to help? Whether you're a country Western fan or not, music fan or not, Alan Jackson's song, Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning, is a great reflection of the mood and what was going on then. And there was a revival in a sense. People started going back to church. People wanted to serve. People wanted to reach out. People wanted to help. And I don't know, we're so divided today, I don't know what that would look like today. But down there, we're just focusing on the task that's in front of us. Yet we had an entire south parking lot that was filled with all types of people that were wanting to serve and give and help all those that were first responders. And what stands out most is the North Carolina Baptist Disaster Relief Team and the Salvation Army. Now, I know there was many others down there, but they genuinely poured into our FBI hazmat team, the folks that were on my team, or on our team, I should say, and they cared for where we were at spiritually. Did we need anything? Physical needs. They fed us. They were 100% there to serve.
Interesting as you reflect on 9/11, with all the horrors that were there and present, your reflection is upon the love you saw.
Absolutely. There's two things that I focus on, and it comes up every year. I have a tendency to compartmentalize, to be able to figure out a way to how to deal with it, process it, and be able to work through it. But it comes up every year, and part of that was the fact that those that were willing to serve, and the other part was the folks that we saw on the inside. So as we're digging through the rubble, as we came across people or items inside, one of the things that stuck out to me was when they were sitting there on the telephone, were they calling for help, or did it hit and they had no idea that this was happening? And where that became impactful is, within the next year after 9/11, Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron came out with a book called Way of the Master. And there was a question about how we do ministry. And one of those was, is it relational ministry? So do I need to get to know you before I share the good news of Jesus Christ? And if it's September 10th, how do you go about sharing the gospel? You tell them that they need Christ, and what it means to be a sinner and what Christ's death on the cross and resurrection means. And so when I look back at those that we pulled out of there, were we deliberate in our day-to-day interactions of how we share the gospel with individuals?
You talked about compartmentalizing a little bit. How does one, in your line of work, right? I mean, you've seen the worst of humanity. You've had to be involved with rescuing children, exploited children. You've dealt with hardened criminals. How does one walk their faith in dealing with such horror over the course of a couple decades?
I get to look at that in three different ways. I get to look at it before being saved, as a new believer, being saved, solid in my walk with the Lord, and now solid in my walk with a family. So I get to look at that in many, many different ways. And there's something that's righteous, there's something that's virtuous about going out and catching bad guys or violent criminals. And yet, you still got to come home. You still have to process. You get to see everybody at their worst.
How does a guy turn that off when they enter their house? See their kids run up to them?
That is an individual thing, and I wish I had the other than you know that God is sovereign over this fallen world. There is no other way that you can be able to, I mean, there's coping mechanisms, there's all kinds of fabulous things out there, but at the end of the day, we need to know that God is still sovereign. God wins in the end. But from a practical standpoint, there's days that it's tough. Once I had little girls of my own, it became a much, much harder process for me.
And even with, you mentioned your girls, the recent film, The Sound of Freedom, Jim Caviezel starring in, came out. It's brought a lot of attention, a lot of awareness to an issue that's needed awareness. Do you think people will stay ready and vigilant about this issue, or it'll just come to the public eye and then move on? I mean, you've been in law enforcement a long time. Well,
there's always the news cycle, right? And I want to believe that when we're presented with an issue or a problem, especially as Christians, as believers, that what can we do? What can we do as individuals? What can we do as a church? What can we do in the community? And the question is where can we practically address each of those things? And where can we try and attack or come alongside or pour into or minister to? And I've been working crimes against children since just prior to 9/11. So March of 2001, there was a priority shift in the FBI, and that's what we started working on was crimes against children. And I worked that up until the end of my career. And so to look at what does that mean to the church, or what does that mean to the people down the street, it starts with a lot of different areas. It starts with the struggles with pornography. It starts with being aware of what's going on around you. We get caught up in our own little world and our own little phones, and how quickly we can forget.
As a former FBI agent, law enforcement a long time, your husband and a dad, what do you want men, Christian men, to know, to be focusing on? What do they need to be aware of? Is there a spiritual battle going on too?
Well, ultimately, all of this is a spiritual battle, right? So this is a war over souls, and the fatherlessness problem in this country is just unbelievable. And what does that mean for the father that gets up and goes to work, does his hours, comes home, takes his family, goes to church? What does that look practically? And you have to lead in the home. Mm-hmm. And we have to be very deliberate, very, very deliberate in everything that we do with our children, how we lead in our homes, and even how we parent, how we are up in our kids' business with what's going on their phones, and being able to communicate of the struggles that they're having. This takes an entire family to be able to talk and process, and it's not easy. Yeah. Especially when you come home tired as a father and a husband. You have to be diligent, and I wish I could say I always do that. I don't always do that, but it's a constant battle. Yeah.
Last question. You're here on 9/11, looking back on it. However, you know, your FBI days are behind you. What are you up to now?
I am a criminal justice professor at Dordt University, a Christian university in Northwest Iowa. I'm also still a part-time deputy in rural Iowa. I'll get a shout out to all the guys out there on our department. And I'm hoping to raise up the next generation of Christian law enforcement officers, Christian judicial officials, and my role now has changed. My role is now to equip them, and the biggest impact that we can have is, one, with the gospel, and secondly, how you do that as a Christian.
Yeah, appreciate it. And as we look back on 9/11, thank you for all you did to help so many people.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate you being here, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gordon Robertson. Thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more encouraging videos like this one. Welcome to the 700 Club Interactive family, and God bless you.